The champagne glasses clinked. The music played. Everyone smiled, except when they looked at him. A black man standing alone in a sea of white faces, treated like he didn't belong at the most important day of someone's life. Whispers followed him. Eyes avoided him. Security even questioned him. But when the bride took the microphone and spoke his name, the entire room fell silent. What she revealed next didn't just shock the guests. It shattered their assumptions and exposed a truth they'd spend the rest of their lives trying to forget. This is a story about judgment, redemption, and the moment everything changed. Marcus Chen had spent 23 years building a life most people only dreamed of. A decorated surgeon at Boston General, he'd saved countless lives through patient rounds, complex surgeries, and mentoring young residents who looked up to him. His colleagues respected him. His patients trusted him. He'd earned every accolade on his office wall through sacrifice, sleepless nights, and an unshakable commitment to excellence. But even after all those years in high-pressure operating rooms, Marcus still hated crowded social events. The small talk, the performance of ease. He could hold a scalpel steady through a 12-hour surgery, but cocktail party conversations made his palms sweat. Still, today wasn't about his comfort. Today was about family. Sarah Mitchell had been more than a patient 8 years ago when she came to him with a life-threatening condition. She'd been a frightened college student, facing a diagnosis that could have ended everything. Marcus had performed a surgery that few would have attempted, spent hours in the operating room, refused to give up when complications arose. He'd given her a second chance at life, and in the years that followed, they'd maintained a quiet friendship. Occasional emails, holiday cards, updates on her recovery and his career. When the wedding invitation arrived with a handwritten note asking him to attend, Marcus had hesitated. He knew what it meant to step into that world. The exclusive country club, the wealthy families, the whispered judgments. He'd experienced it before. But Sarah had insisted. She wanted him there on the most important day of her life. So he put on his best suit, drove 3 hours, and walked through those ornate doors, ready to celebrate, unprepared for what came next. The look started the moment he entered the reception hall. Not direct stares, nothing that obvious. These were the practiced glances of people who'd learned to disguise their discomfort. Eyes that swept past him, then returned with questions. Conversations that paused as he walked by, resuming in hushed tones once he'd passed. Marcus had learned to read these signals years ago. The subtle shift in body language, the slight tightening of smiles, the way people suddenly found their phones fascinating when he approached. He found his assigned table near the back, not with the family, not near the wedding party, just close enough to be present, far enough to be forgotten. The other guests at his table offered polite nods before turning back to their own conversations. No one asked his name. No one asked how he knew the bride. He was simply there, an unexplained presence they'd rather not investigate. Then came the first assumption. A woman in an elegant dress approached with an empty glass, smiling warmly. "Excuse me, could you point me toward the bar staff?" Marcus gestured across the room. She waited, expectant, then added, "Oh, aren't you working tonight?" The question landed like a slap. She'd seen his tailored suit, his polished shoes, his table assignment, but she'd still assumed he was there to serve, not to celebrate. He corrected her gently. Her face flushed as she hurried away. But it didn't stop there. Security appeared next. 2 uniformed guards, polite but insistent, asking to verify his identity. Other guests watched now, no longer hiding their attention. Marcus felt the heat rising in his chest, not just anger, but something deeper. Shame. The kind that comes not from doing something wrong, but from being treated as if your very existence is suspicious. He could have left. Part of him wanted to. Walk out those doors, drive home, forget this ever happened. But he'd been invited. He had every right to be here. And Sarah had wanted him here. So he stayed, jaw clenched, dignity intact, waiting. The reception continued around him like he was invisible. Toasts were made. Dances were shared. Laughter filled the room. But Marcus sat alone at that back table, a decorated surgeon who'd saved lives, reduced to an outsider at a celebration he'd been personally invited to attend. Then the bride stood up, took the microphone, and everything changed. Sarah's voice cut through the chatter, steady and clear. "I need everyone's attention, please." The room quieted. Glasses stopped clinking. Conversations died mid-sentence. All eyes turned to the bride in her flowing white dress, standing at the center of the reception hall. "Most of you don't know this," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "But 8 years ago, I was dying." The silence deepened. Marcus felt his throat tighten. "I had a condition that 3 doctors said was inoperable. They told my parents to prepare for the worst, to say goodbye. I was 20 years old, and my life was supposed to be over." She paused, tears gathering in her eyes. But one surgeon disagreed. One man looked at my case and said, "I can save her." He didn't know me. He didn't know my family. He just saw a young woman who deserved a chance to live. Sarah's gaze swept across the room, landing on faces that had been cold and dismissive just moments before. That surgeon spent 11 hours in the operating room. When complications arose that would have made others give up, he kept going. When my heart stopped twice on the table, he brought me back. And when I woke up 3 days later, he was there, exhausted but smiling, telling me I was going to be okay. She turned, looking directly at Marcus. The room followed her gaze. Dr. Marcus Chen saved my life. And tonight, many of you treated him like he was a threat, like he didn't belong here. You questioned him. You watched him. You made him feel unwelcome at my wedding, the wedding he made possible. The weight of her words crushed the room. Faces flushed, eyes dropped. The woman who'd asked if he was working looked at the floor. The guests who'd whispered and stared suddenly found themselves exposed. "Without this man," Sarah continued, her voice breaking, "I wouldn't be standing here. I wouldn't have graduated college. I wouldn't have met my husband. I wouldn't have this life." She walked toward Marcus's table, tears streaming down her face. The entire room watched in stunned silence as she reached him, took his hand, and said the words that would cut deeper than any accusation. "You didn't see a guest tonight. You saw a problem. And I need you to understand how much that hurts." The reception never recovered its celebration. Some guests approached Marcus with stammered apologies he hadn't asked for. Others slipped out early, unable to face the mirror Sarah had held up to them. The woman who'd mistaken him for staff couldn't meet his eyes. Security quietly disappeared. Marcus stayed until the end, not because he wanted to prove a point, but because Sarah had asked him to be there, and he wouldn't let prejudice drive him away from honoring that request. When he finally left that night, driving back through the darkness, he felt something complex churning inside him. Not victory, there was nothing to win here, not even satisfaction, just a weary recognition of a pattern he'd lived with his entire life. The assumption of guilt, the burden of proving his worth, the exhausting reality that no matter how many lives he saved, how many degrees he earned, how much he achieved, there would always be rooms where he'd have to justify his presence. But something else lingered too. Sarah's courage, her refusal to let that moment pass in silence, her willingness to risk the comfort of her own wedding guests, to stand up for what was right. That's the part we need to remember. Because this story isn't really about Marcus. It's about every accomplished black professional who's been followed in stores, every successful person of color who's been questioned in spaces they've earned the right to occupy, every human being who's been judged by their appearance before anyone bothered to learn their name. And it's about the people who witness these moments, who feel that uncomfortable tension and have to choose. Stay silent and preserve the comfort of the room, or speak up even when it's awkward, even when it disrupts the celebration, even when it costs something. Sarah made her choice. She used her voice when it mattered most. The question is, what will you do when you're faced with yours? Because that moment is coming. Maybe it already has. And your silence or your courage will write the next chapter of someone else's story. What will you choose?